Welcome everyone to Gems of the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle. I'm David Sanders. On behalf of Still and Moving Center, I'd like to welcome you to today's topic, self-crafting. And who better to introduce this topic to us than our own self-crafted, the amazing Renée Tillotson. She needs no introduction, so at this point, I would like to turn it over to Renée to carry us forward. Are you ready, Renée?
Yes, I'm ready to turn it over now to Doris. We have a brand new keynote reading to begin all of our meetings this year, for which this topic of self-crafting is the overarching topic for the whole of 2021. And so we have a reading that comes from the back of your almanac called Carving Your Statue, that we will use in place of where we have been using the Luster of Wisdom quote. We'll be using this one, Carving Your Statue. And so we have Doris Morisaki, who will be giving that to us for the first time today.
Aloha, Renée. Aloha, David. Welcome, everybody. Carving your statue. Withdraw into yourself and look. And if you do not find yourself beautiful yet, act as does the creator of a statue that is to be made beautiful. He cuts away here, he smooths there, he makes this line lighter, this other purer, until a lovely face has grown upon his work. So do you also. Cut away all that is excessive, straighten all that is crooked, bring light to all that is overcast. Labor to make all one glow of beauty and never cease chiseling your statue until there shall shine out on you from it the godlike or goddess-like splendor of virtue. Plotinus. Mahalo.
Hello, very much, Doris. So for this topic of self-crafting and taking up the tradition of the theosophical perspective on this idea of being able to craft ourselves into whatever shape, meaning internally, we choose, and we notice that this quote that Doris just read to us from Plotinus talks about looking within. So I think it's fairly obvious that according to a lot of things that we have control over, such as what we do in terms of our diet, what we do in terms of our exercise, what we do in terms of our sleep, all of these things do have a bearing upon us physically. And that is going to show in our externals. And that is just like the ephemera. That's just the outside of the real self-crafting that we're talking about here, which has to do with what we're doing within to shape our moral being, shall we say, to shape, to give direction to our soul, to our life's purpose, to actually fulfilling the purpose for which we are here. That's the kind of shaping that I think we're talking about when we're talking about true self-crafting. And the theosophical tradition gives a framework of this vast, vast, vast spectrum between spirit above and matter below. And we only use that metaphorically speaking. This idea of oneness, absolute consciousness, that which is beyond consciousness, being represented by spirit, and then everything that is below is going to be more and more materialized until we get to the physical realm. And that's the realm of matter, of being here on earth. And so there's just infinite gradations of that. And when I see Fariba here from the Rumi tradition and the Sufi tradition, we think of these 70,000 veils of light and darkness that the soul passes through to come into being here on earth. And so there is in Theosophy both two ways of traveling. Just as from the scientific perspective, we have evolution proposed, whereby different life forms make their way up from a very, very simple level of organization to greater and greater complexity, greater capacities, and greater consciousness. That's evolution. Matter making its way higher and higher up towards this spirit plane of higher consciousness, of total consciousness. And then Theosophy says, yes, that is one of the ways in which things work between spirit and matter. But what goes up must come down. There's also this matter of involution. So involution is this process by which spirit makes its way down into matter. So it's kind of like the double helix of genetics. We have a spiral in one direction. We also have a spiral in the other direction. The involution and evolution are both taking place. There's a quote by Jesus saying, if flesh came into being for the sake of spirit, so if matter came into being for the sake of spirit, that is a mystery. But if spirit came into being for the sake of the body, for the sake of matter, that is a wondrous miracle. Yeah. Why on earth would spirit that's in such a lofty position of, this freedom of absolute consciousness come down into the confines of matter? We can understand why matter would want to evolve up and out into the light of spirit, but why would spirit want to come down into matter? And it's a huge question, really. And one of the analogies that came to mind in considering this was that something like our brain, as the center of where, so to speak, our consciousness happens, extends down through our whole nervous system and out into our entire bodies, right down to the tips of our fingertips and tips of our toes. It does two things. It enlivens the whole body, and it also gives a chance for the mind, through the brain, through the nervous system, to take in all this information. Evidently, spirit, we could think of as absolutely one. When, however, it's coming into matter, it can no longer retain its oneness. It separates out into all the heterogeneity, all the differentiation of this vast universe. And so how can spirit retain some sort of connection with itself? Seems like there has to be this intelligence that's traveling back and forth, between spirit and matter, that can connect the two, just like the human nervous system can do. Another really interesting point that's made by Theosophical philosophy is that in this traveling between spirit and matter, there's this balance point. Above this balance point is all these beings, all this consciousness that is more spiritual than earthy. Below that is all those beings, all that consciousness that is more earthy. But that balance point between the spiritual and the material is what's called humanity. And it doesn't matter where in the universe that balance is found. It doesn't matter what the form is that has that balance between spirit and nature. So theoretically, there could be beings all over the universe that strike the balance between the spiritual and the physical, and they would be human, no matter what they look like. It's not a matter of what the form is, it's this balance point. And what's so unique about this balance point is that there's a higher mind and a lower mind. There's an ability to look up and ascend. There's an ability to look down, deal with matter, but also to descend further into it and get stuck. So that ability to look to the divine, to reach out and compassion and love, being able to identify with everyone and everything, that would be our higher nature, our higher mind aspiring that way. And then our lower nature, which we need to deal with being on the earth. We have to figure out how to, for example, because we live in these bodies, we have to figure out how to feed them and how to shelter them and how to keep them alive and all these practical things that we need a practical lower mind for. And yet what we get with this kind of dual nature that we have as human beings with a sense of choice is we also have this sense of a personal self that evidently the rest of the beings aren't saddled with in the same way that we are saddled with it. If we're on that evolutionary arc and we've gone beyond the human phase, we already feel one with the all, one with the infinite, one with the divine. We therefore have no real sense of personal self to lose or to fear losing. And before the human stage, evolutionarily speaking, we also don't have that same sense of personal self. We're functioning with all those instincts that nature has given us. So we're able to take care of all of our needs, and anyone in the animal kingdom, of course, the vegetable kingdom, and lower microbial forms of life, for example. And theosophically speaking, absolutely everything in matter is alive, truly, and it's on an evolutionary journey. So even if, for example, it's in the mineral kingdom, you can imagine that something in the mineral kingdom could get somehow absorbed into the roots of plants and then eventually eaten by an animal, and then eventually it can move up in terms of what's going on with it. But that was on the physical side. At any rate, all these forms of life before the human kingdom don't have that same sense of a personal self and are not plagued by a conscience that's trying to decide what to do, what's right and what's wrong. The animal doesn't have to worry about that. It does what it naturally does. And so it's in the human kingdom that we have this powerful, powerful sense of self that can become selfish, or self that can lift itself to the self of all. And that's where that matter of choice comes in. And choice is the key to self-crafting. That's how it is that we can determine what kind of person we're going to be in the world. Sometimes we feel as if, how could we possibly have a sense of choice when things happen in our lives that we seem to have absolutely no control over? They just happen to us, is the way it feels. And that's where this turning within becomes so important. I so often think of people in circumstances of being confined, being under somebody else's will externally. And yet that self-crafting has to do with choosing, no, I'm not going to succumb internally to whatever fears that I might have, whatever anger I might have, all these things that I could succumb to in this position where I feel as if I don't have the power of choice to leave that situation. I can at least craft my response. And according to the way I craft my response, I'm either going to keep and enhance my dignity, or I'm going to demean it. And then all those little things in everyday life, all those little situations in which we find ourselves all the time, which is my response going to be? If I'm constantly aspiring to this higher divine nature of myself, I'm going to have a lot more likelihood of having a response that is one that I'm going to feel proud of afterwards. I mean, it is going to make me feel like, okay, I did okay in that situation. And if I'm tending, on the other hand, to be worried about what other people think of me, or worried about a lot of materialistic things, am I going to have enough? Am I going to lose it? Am I all those kinds of more selfish concerns are going to then condition my ability to craft my response. It won't be as free and as open to a more positive response. I will have kind of restricted my inner boundaries that nobody can restrict except myself. For myself, I can self-craft those inner planes of my life. There are some movements in modern science that I'm really, really interested in, and I don't expect to be able to look into these in depth today, but I do just want to touch on 3 of these movements that we're finding in scientific thought today. for the possibility that maybe we could take them up in discussion now, or possibly different times in the future as we go through the different themes in this week or in this year of self-crafting. One of those is neuroplasticity. The reason that neuroplasticity seems to me to have such tremendous power to reinforce the idea of ourselves as self-choosers and self-crafters is that for a long time, science just talked about our thought as being a process that came out of our brains. And depending on what our brains were doing, that's what we would think. And it was a very deterministic kind of way of thinking about human thought. Neuroplasticity says the brain can always evolve. It isn't predetermined at birth. In childhood, brains can change a lot. And now to more and more of an extent, they can find out that adult brains can change too. They began seeing this in terms of healing damage to the brain and to the nervous system, to the nerves. And then especially one of the pioneers of neuroplasticity was actually Moshe Feldenkrais, whom we study a certain movement form with. And the idea there is that according to the way our mind directs our brain, we are actually changing the substance of our brain. We're changing our brain's activity. And by changing the brain's activity, we can actually change the structure of the brain itself. And there were some powerful experiments done in connection with the Dalai Lama and Tibetan Buddhist practices of meditation, and showing the kind of changes in a human brain that were possible through deep meditation. That's a pretty powerful form of self-crafting. Another one of the developments in science that interests me along these lines is called epigenetics. And epigenetics has to do with the fact that during the course of our lifetime, we can, through our lifestyle and through environmental changes, the different aspects of what's encoded in us genetically can either be turned on or turned off. And so far, I haven't seen a lot of research in terms of us choosing that. I think that's the next step, probably in epigenetics, is talking about, okay, if lifestyle changes can cause us to either, for example, be more prone to heart failure or less prone to heart failure, two different neural pathways. What is it that can make that change? Well, that's that power of human choice, right? That really important power. And then the third form of scientific research I'm interested in isn't even fully accepted by the scientific community, and it's called polyvagal theory, and it has to do with the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is the 10th nerve in the brain. It's called the 10th nerve, and it runs down through the face, through the larynx, into the heart, and then into the gut. And it's a really critical nerve for all sorts of things. And so there is a man named Porges, Stephen Porges, who has been doing a lot of research on this vagus nerve, and says that the human vagus nerve is so developed that we are no longer confined like the lower animals, especially like the reptilian animals and below, to just fight, flight, or faint. If we keep our wits about us, and if we use our higher minds, we will be able to be in a more in a position to not respond with those kind of lower responses, that we can instead choose our response in, for example, very scary situations. Yeah. And that as communal creatures, as creatures that live in community with others, the way that we interact, and that happens up in our faces, and it happens through our voices, has an effect on other beings, and no doubt on ourselves, that can change this response and calm us. Just the tone of someone's voice can change that response so that one can be more confident, for example, and less fearful in the face of what could be danger or might not be. And we could just have this kind of automatic response, but we don't need to succumb to just automatic response. So those three scientific theories are and fields are ones that I think are interesting in regard to this concept of self-crafting. And I'd like to now open the floor to your thoughts and responses and any questions.
Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
I'm always interested in terms of balancing, between body and spirit or spirit and matter. I'm always interested to see what are kind of self-regulating systems that we have in our body. And recently I've been looking at the circulatory system and how closely connected the veins and the nerves are, often running right next to each other, wrapping around each other. And, the veins and the arteries are either drawing, oxygen to tissues or helping to recirculate the depleted blood. And so it just interests me. I know that with the polyvagal system, the nervous system in general, there's fight or flight, there's rest and digest. And so I feel like there's something that parallels that balance between spirit and matter within our own body. And maybe that's coming from my belief that we are just a reflection of the whole, the universe in a drop of water kind of a thing. So that was just a thought that had come up. Thank you.
Beautiful. And I would say that the theosophical outlook would be that everything is a matter of from above, below. So anything that we can see in greater nature is going to be reflected down on lower planes of nature. So of course it would be represented in this human body of ours. And you're suggesting one of them being the circulatory system of the veins and arteries going to and from the heart. Beautifully. One carrying the oxygen to all the cells of the body, and then the other carrying the carbon dioxide back to be released into the air. Yeah, and that seems very much like this double helix of descending and ascending. Thank you.
Right, and then carrying that same analogy further, we're releasing the carbon dioxide, which is then being absorbed by the plants in our environment, right? So this ecosystem, beyond ourselves, this interconnection between us and every other living being, including our energetic field. So like our fascial network connects every part of our body to every other part of our body. It's representative of that we are this one entity. But then we've got, through various forms of photography, we can see that our body extends beyond the physical touch layer out into this network of energy that extends beyond and then interfuses with every other being around us. I wonder, along these lines of neuroplasticity and the new science of epigenetics, I'm wondering if the development of self-consciousness and ego, one anthropologist suggested that might have been a left turn in evolutionary process. When we look at the new science of flow state, for example, where we move beyond self-consciousness and into this place of moving from unity and effortlessness, it seems as though that's likely the next step in our human evolution, where we leave behind the cares and woes and worries, for example. When we're in that flow state, we know all of that disappears and we're aware of our oneness. We can feel the energy around us when we move from that place. So I'm wondering if that stage that went from animals not worrying about themselves to where humans have this ability to worry and in a sense shoot themselves in the foot and degrade their energy. But now we're seeing the beginnings of this next evolutionary stage where we jump into this flow state and become something that is then once again carefree, but at a higher level. Just my thoughts on the topic.
I resonate to everything that you're saying except the left turn. I think my understanding would be that it's necessary to pass through this point where free choice is possible, and that we can go up or down. There's nothing predetermined. That's a really important point. And then we can choose. From there, we can choose that flow state, and we're doing so self-consciously. Yeah.
I can also hold that in consciousness. Who else would like to jump in?
I'll go ahead and jump in. This is Sandia. I'm in the middle of cooking right now. I don't have my thought fully formed, but it seems somewhat related to what David was talking about, and the idea of self-crafting overall. I'm reading this great book right now called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she's an indigenous woman who also is a scientist of ecology. So she's a Western trained ecologist, also from an indigenous tradition, which is fascinating. And she is telling a story about another indigenous plant studier of hers, a friend, who goes out into the woods on long walks and long journeys for multiple days and never feels alone because she is always in community with the plants and animals around her. And it's not like this, there's the human kingdom and then the natural world. It's all one. It's not a separation of the two. It's not a higher and a lower. And I think she makes the point that maybe the other creatures and plants and animals are more evolved than we are because they know that we're all one and they understand these cycles, and it's the humans that need to learn from the plants and the animals more so. And I just found that to be really beautiful. And she also talks about the importance of language and how if our grandmother was out gardening or doing something and somebody called our grandmother an it, used the pronoun it to refer to our grandmother, how offended we would be. And the same way that we can think about trees and plants and call them in the same as human pronouns. Unfortunately, we have like he, she pronouns in English, but essentially, calling a tree a she. And lots of times that children do this as well, that they talk about the plants and animals in the natural world as part of the human world too, as a person that deserves that level of personhood respect, and what a difference it can make when we change our language to refer to things in a different way that includes them as part of all of our kingdom. So that's from Braiding Sweetgrass. Just wanted to offer that thought.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think one of the suggestions that I could bring from a theosophical perspective is that all life forms are tending upwards and on this evolutionary arc, and they all will pass through the human kingdom, or they already have passed through the human kingdom, seeing it as that balance point. And so, like, there's a phrase from Helena Blavatsky, who was the person who brought theosophy into the modern world's attention in the 1800s. And it's something like all beings are either incipient human beings, or I can't remember her phrase, but they've gone past the human stage. But there's no separation. That's why it's this continuum. It's not as if some are lesser beings, they're just a different place on the scale at the moment. And so you're absolutely right. It would be so heartless of us to think that the door that we slam isn't going to get affected by the fact that we've done that to it. It will.
I guess to me, I take some issue with even the hierarchy and the scale. To me, it seems very ethnocentric. And it's kind of basing everything on the human experience. Have they gone through the human experience yet or not? And to me, that seems sort of ethnocentric. And like, it's humbling to me to think of a plant or an animal having such diversity of knowledge, and that I have so much to learn from them if they're another personhood. To me, it flips things around in a way that is really quite inspiring, rather than basing it all on my own human experience. Like for the dolphins, for example, scientists are realizing that the dolphins have such incredible communication and emotional communities. And we have so much to learn from that, and that trees are talking to each other through their hormones and their pheromones, through their root system and the wind, and the trees really are talking to each other, and that science, Western science, is finally realizing this. To me, it's humbling, and I like to think of it in a different kind of holistic way that's not as hierarchical, I guess. Yeah.
I guess I can see it from really both perspectives, and that there is such a beauty in realizing the intelligence of nature, that if we come from a perspective that man was simply put upon this earth to rule over these kingdoms, which really don't have the same kind of intelligence and life that we do, that does seem very separate. And so I appreciate the perspective that you're bringing forth. And I guess for me, it's this idea that what we call human from a theosophical perspective is a lot different from looking at and thinking about these things called people that are in what we call human bodies. If instead we look at it as that balance between spirit and matter, where self-consciousness and choice is possible, then it doesn't matter what form that creature, that being is in. If there's a balance between spirit and matter such that self-consciousness and choice comes to bear as a possibility, then that's what we call human. And so if it looked like a dolphin, if it looked like a Christmas tree ornament, if it looked like, it doesn't really matter. It's or, any one of the thousands of Star Wars, kind of creatures. It doesn't really matter. It's just this balance. So that's what makes, I think, me have a little bit different perspective and not see it as being so I can't remember how to say it, but human-centered. Kirk, you want to help me out there?
It looks like Fariba might have something to add too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kirk. I will.
Okay, thanks.
Hi.
Well, I think Sandhya makes a really good point, and I think it is also something that we certainly have not learned, and that's why we're in such dire straits as a world community, is because we haven't appreciated the extent to which the divine is just as present in all the kingdoms of nature as it is in the human kingdom. And I was thinking about, and this is the basis of what's called deep ecology, right? But I was thinking about I was reading again the myth of Prometheus, and thinking about it at another level, because part of that myth, and Joseph Campbell says, civilizations are defined by the myths. These are not fairy tales that somebody made up. They were man's first science, and there's great truths in nature that are contained in them that we've forgotten. But in the myth of Prometheus, he is, because he brings the fire of self-consciousness to humanity, he is chained to a rock by Zeus, and a vulture comes and eats out his liver each day, and then the liver grows back during the night, well, sometimes it's an eagle, sometimes it's a vulture, comes back and eats it out again, right? So it's this perpetual cycle of suffering and pain that he is subjected to. And this is how the myth ends, that's the curse of self-consciousness that Prometheus, because Prometheus is us, right? It's none other than humanity. We are chained to the rock of matter. We believe ourselves to be these physical beings. And yet we have the light of self-consciousness also, which allows for so much to happen that couldn't happen otherwise. But there's also, there was actually the original play of Prometheus, the drama that was first enacted on the stages of Athens 2,500 years ago, was a 3-part play, and 2 of the parts have been lost. So all we have is this one myth that we keep hearing again and again. But the 3rd one is Prometheus Unbound, which Percy Bysshe Shelley did his own version of what that means. But so what happens when Prometheus is released, and what does that mean? And how does he get released? And so I'm going to try and just summarize this in a very succinct and simple way. But part of the idea is that this bounding ourselves to this ignorance of being a separate being, separating ourselves from other kingdoms of nature, from other human beings, thinking that we are separate. That's being chained to the rock of matter, right? But once we're released, we understand, and it's through the light of self-consciousness and the struggle that takes place. So Zeus is a god, right? Yes, he chains Prometheus to the rock of matter, but he's just as necessary as all the other gods. It's a process we need to go through, this ignorance and darkness, in order for the light to emerge in the end. There's no other way that it's possible for true enlightenment, as represented by the Buddha, by Krishna, by great teachers. There's no other way to do it except through this, going through the valley of death, the darkness. And but in that realization, part of that realization is the idea that the divine is everywhere. It's not separate. It's not just in you or me. It's just not in the light in my head. it pervades all. It's universal. It's omnipresent. There you go.
That was big help. Thank you so much, Kirk.
Cliff, are you back online?
Yeah, I thought Fariba had something to say.
Yes, Cliff. I was thinking about the two words in Quran, Bashar and Insan. And Bashar is the clay house that God blow his breath or its breath into the holiness, the spirit within the clay house, which becomes human. But which becomes the Bashar. But Bashar is not going to be fully recognized as Insan. So it's two words, Bashar and Insan. And Insan comes from the word Ons, which means connection or understanding the connection. So you may be born with the holy breath and a lot of potential locked into you, which is your spirit within the matter, and have a human form. But the moment that you start understanding the connections, you become insan. So without that, it's not activated. That's, I wanted to bring it in from the Sufi and also Quran. That's it. Cliff, go ahead.
Well, in hearing the discussion right now, I was drawn to these ideas by the novelist William Faulkner, who said that there's kind of like three levels of consciousness, human consciousness, and he called them innocence, violence, and wisdom. And it seems like there's this realm of non-self-consciousness, when we're not self-conscious, that is innocence. And it's reflected in all the animal kingdoms and in children to a certain stage. But then we get into this kind of very difficult, nasty realm of self-consciousness, where we with our self-consciousness become very selfish, and that leads to all kinds of problems and violence. But this idea of gems from the wisdom traditions, it's like we can't go back. Once we get self-consciousness and selfishness, we can't go back to innocence. We somehow have to break through the ceiling or the roof and get to wisdom. And that's somehow to get to a level of self-consciousness that is, again, universal, but is not the same as innocence. I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
The only things that I can tell you based on my observation, I work with one enlightened teacher, and I can testify that innocent, but not naivety, was a huge part of her nature, almost childlike innocent, that could absorb everything. But of course, she wasn't naive, you know. And that, I think, has a strong connection based on what I have experienced personally, sitting with her, with wisdom, and not the wisdom we can gather, but also within Sufism, there is a wisdom that comes from above. And of course, the violence, you touch upon it, is when we become, when we think about, when we recognize ourselves based on the borders of ourselves, we become also enormously defensive, because we're human. We are very, you know, we need all type of cushion and protection. So we become self-protective and also in some level violence, because we want to guard who we are. Does it, did I express it in a different from different angle, Cliff? Does it touch on what you were saying?
Yeah, somehow wisdom is a return to innocence, but in a more self-conscious way.
Pointian, I think I would choose Pointian because it's so evolved. It's not naivety. It's like a pure wisdom that comes from above because we can connect to. Is always there. It's innocent at the same time. I don't know. You probably will formulate it better.
No, I'm struggling too for words.
Well, wouldn't you want to say that connecting up with the other parts of the conversation about instinct as well, that we find, the quote unquote, the lower kingdoms of nature, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the mineral kingdom, it's acting through innate intelligence at various levels. And in animals, we call it instinct, right? But it's pure, there's a purity there. There's not malice, there's not sense of, although we see, the tooth and claw aspect of nature as well, but it arises out of, it's not a afflictive emotion that violence arises out of. It's a natural instinct to preserve the species and to act in harmony with their own nature, right? But it is part of every spiritual tradition that I know of, this idea that we have to return to the innocence of a child and the innocence, the purity of nature, the pure goodness and unity of nature. It's always acting, it's the representation of divine intelligence in matter without this, the curse of self-consciousness. And again, that's why the human stage is necessary, or part of the reason is that we have to regain that innocence and purity of the child, of the of pure love, of pure identity with the other, of unity with nature, but at the same time recognizing ourselves as being individuated beings, and making that connection. That's the connection between, part of the connection between heaven and earth, right? So that we know on every level how to enact. It's a knowledge, it's a clear, direct knowledge of how to act on every plane in order to maximize the good that can be done. That's the whole, that's human evolution. So you become this current of divine goodness and knowledge. And so it's, and this is why the, the great adepts, the great spiritual teachers, they have an insight in the smallest of situations of exactly what needs to be done in order to have the most beneficial effect.
Well, that was wonderful. As you were talking about instinct, I immediately could see if it's pure in the form that you mentioned it. It can have a pathway to the inner senses because it's not cluttered. It's instinct, even if, being one with the situation, doesn't matter in animals, it's built in or not. If it's without clutter, they can recognize more than what it is. That's an innocent, you mentioned, I think that's every educator today had the duty to be able to teach or lead the person to their innocent nature in order to become whole and move from it. Because our society very much is equipped with stripping us from our innocence. And not, I think the saddest things about dealing with younger people who don't have experience, I mean, young is like up to 40s probably, is that they haven't learned from any type of society they associated with about how to recognize their own nature. I think that's the pure sadness for me when I see a person who is wonderful but still struggles because our society had so many layers about romance, about this, about that, it's so many preconceived ideas that we bombard with every day, that it becomes a big part of education to say, go back to your innocent nature and start there, because we all are very different.
David, I
Renée.
wanted to mention that for me, one of the saddest things is encountering somebody who feels like a victim in their own lives. And this is where, to me, the importance of the concept of self-crafting comes in, that we do not have to be like anything out there that's being pushed upon us. We can turn within to our purity, to our innocence. And from that point, we have the power of self-choice to direct our lives as we find it the best to do. And in doing that, we can look to all of these wonderful teachers in nature. And so it might be actually appropriate for us to end listening again to the luster of wisdom that's looking at nature and saying, okay, what can we who are no longer in the form of a rock, part of the earth, we're no longer in the form of a mountain, but we have passed through all those forms, evolutionarily speaking. What can we learn from them? What can we remember? And if anybody else has this here with them to read it out loud, they can, or I could do it. Does anybody have the luster of wisdom with them right now?
I think it's you, Renée.
Okay, I guess. And then I'm also going to ask people about something after that. Okay, learn from these facets of nature. Though trampled on by all, be firm in your adversity, like the earth itself. From these mountains, which hold their mineral and other resources for the welfare of the world, learn that you must live for others, not for yourself. Like the wind, you must be able to pass through unhindered, all pervasive, touching everything, yet itself untouched. The sky is verily the shining paradigm of the yogin. You should be limpid, pure, purifying, pleasing, and refreshing like water, effulgent with the luster of wisdom. Like the fire that reduces to ashes all impurity. Like the python, lie still and take only what comes to you, and when nothing comes, fast as the python does. Like the sea, deep and unfathomable, neither be swollen by what flows into you, nor be depleted by what is withdrawn from you. Like the bee, take in little by little, and from good and bad alike, extract the essence, even as the bee gathers honey. Certainly a lot of respect in, that's Krishna to Uddhava in the Hindu tradition, so that would have been about 5,000 years ago. I just want to mention to you that with this year of self-crafting, I would love for all of you to imagine self-crafting yourself. If you have never considered giving one of the kickoff presentations for Gems from the Wisdom Tradition, I'd love for you to consider doing that, and the idea of lifelong learning that inspires Gems from the Wisdom Traditions. And in the 2021 Almanac, if you turn it just a few pages in, it's not a numbered page, but it's called Themes for 2021 Self-Crafting. And it has all of the themes for the week for the whole year. So I want to encourage you to look through those themes and think, ooh, what would I like to study a little bit more? What would I like to share some thoughts on after I've considered it to a greater degree? And from what tradition would I like to study it? There's so many different traditions. And maybe I'd study it from a tradition I had never studied anything before. Or maybe I would go back to something that is very deep to what I have spent a lifetime studying. So I wanted to encourage everybody to do that kind of self-crafting, to imagine oneself as a presenter, or again as a presenter if you've already done so in the past. Malaya, do you have anything to say at this point?
No, other than that, I do believe that growth and healing happens over long periods of time, sometimes over years, sometimes in an instant. And so this idea of self-crafting is super compelling. I don't know that I've ever thought the word self-crafting, but it really makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm really excited for this coming year. Thank you.
I've asked Maurice if he wouldn't mind jumping in for a moment and to acknowledge our amazing presenter for today.
Yeah.
I can't get my camera to work, but I think my voice still works. So I just want to thank Renée and all of you for presenting such a sort of a cosmology of life and putting us in this wonderful and beautiful ecology and the magnificence of it, the vastness of it, but yet still the importance of everything we do. And in the Theosophical tradition, there is this phrase we use, self-knowledge is loving deeds the child. And I think self-knowledge, of course, has to do with kind of perceiving the real and the unreal. And if you can perceive what's more real, then one can act in a way that's more harmonious. And I think if we think about becoming more self-conscious and more harmonious, then with all of nature as well as with each other, we can uplift and enrich everyone. And I think that's exactly what's happened in this 1 hour in terms of our wonderful combination of thinking. So thank you, Renée, and thank you all.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you. Great, great talk. Thank you so much, Renée. That easily could have gone on for 2 or 3 hours. So this is a beautiful way to end our session today. So thank you so, so much. And we'll see you all tomorrow for satsang or next week in the next gem. Thank you all. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Renée.
Thank you.
Bye.
Aloha.
Aloha.